And here we go, another episode of the Suppress Herald. And just to remind you that what we are talking about is politics is local and so is propaganda. And we take a look every week or two. We go through our local Suppress Herald, we call it. It's also known as the Portland Press Herald. It's a group of newspapers owned by the National Trust for Local News, which is billionaires that are buying up newspapers across the country. They virtually bought all the newspapers in Maine. And so, what I do is just break down what happens with the Suppress Herald locally and what kind of things they report on and what the things they don't, which is the suppress part. You know, the sin of exclusion is pretty rampant with our local newspapers, if they want to be called that. And as I've mentioned before, we grade the editorial page. We go through and we say, okay, what editorials that get published, letters to the editor and editorials on the editorial page are liberal, which are conservative, and which are neutral. And I just did a 2 week summary and pretty telling. You've got 41 liberal letters to the editor. You've got two two conservative letters to the editor that were published, and you've got 27 neutral letters to the editor. Another way to look at this, and I just did this for the first time, just to take a look and see there are hot topics that the editorial page in the Suppress Herald here locally really highlight and push hard. And these are gun control, climate change, Trump, and when I say Trump, I mean letters critical of Trump, and abortion. Abortion took a little bit of a break the last couple of weeks. This is over a 2 week period. We had only one letter on pro-abortion. Guns garnered 6 letters or editorial pages. Climate did pretty well. It had 12, but Trump dominated 15 over a 2 week period. That's two a day. Remember, this paper is published just 6 days a week, and you're talking about two a day anti-Trump letters. Not a single Biden anti-Trump letter in that 2 week period, and it is just unbelievable how slanted that all is if you go and actually do your homework and add it up. I'm going to go through and just look through a couple of weeks and just kind of highlight some of the things they do write about and don't write about, and what's really happening here. And, you know, as I mentioned, climate got a big push. And I think I can sum this up as we go through and just look at some of the headlines, some of the stories, and really look at what the mentality of these people is. Climate change forces responsible options for skiing. Climate change has forced greater reliance on machine made snow for Nordic skiing. We must consider an environmental impact wisely. Let me ask you this. If you're paying attention this week, this is from Agnes Macy, a lifelong Nordic skier, a senior at Bowdoin College, majoring in environmental studies and anthropology. Let me tell you what environmental studies is. Environmental studies is political activism on steroids. That's what you study. I run into environmental studies people on a almost daily basis in the work I do, and they are the most vacuous, biggest idiots on the planet. Environmental studies. They pretend to be engineers or, scientists, and they're actually have very little knowledge of anything, and they're just woke and blindly following the great Green New Deal agenda. And so here we have it. You know, basically, we can't ski anymore. I may remind Agnes that They just got like 6 to 10 feet of snow out in the Sierras, so I guess we can go skiing there, right? I will remind Agnes that a number of years ago, only a few years ago, they were saying that the Sierras would never have any more snow and that the drought in California was permanent. And, all that runoff from all that snow in the Sierras was a thing of the past. They've also said Colorado would never have more snow. Colorado's enjoying fantastic skiing, as is Utah. The East, because of the El Nino, is not having a good winter for snow. It's been warmer and we've had rain, and that happens. I can remember this happening for my whole life. And there you go. We've got the basically vacuous idiot from Bowdoin College who wasted all her money on a worthless education, and she gets to write an article about why we shouldn't be able to ski anymore. Here's a day later. Climate-driven weather causes billions in losses. The United States and the Philippines are the hardest hit, according to a new report. So this is a whole report about insurance and all on climate change, climate-driven weather. It's not climate-driven weather. Well, it is, but it's not climate change-driven weather. It's not man-made climate change-driven weather. It's weather. The big thing is that we've built all these houses on the coasts and in places where weather is going to impact them more from a dollar perspective. And so we've got bigger losses with the insurance companies, but has nothing to do with increase in storms, which is statistically not happening. The data does not support it. Storms aren't more powerful. Storms aren't more frequent. Storms aren't happening in a greater way than they have in past decades and centuries. So it's same old, same old. And then you know, you've got Agnes, what doesn't want us to be able to ski anymore because they have man-made snow from water, taking water, turning it into snow. And then you've got an article, a downhill path for the ski industry. A skier descends Black Mountain in Maine. A new study says U.S. ski areas lost about 5 billion from 2000 to 2019 as a result of human-caused climate change. This is just the most specious thing on the planet. It is, and this is stupid. They've got skiing out west. When it's good out there, it's not so good in the east, and vice versa. And this has been happening forever. The reality is, skiing is just not as popular as it was. And quite honestly, skiing has gotten so darned expensive that a lot of people with families, you can't take the family to skiing any more than you can take the family to an NFL football game. It's a month's salary to take the family to do any of these things. It's just gotten too expensive. It has nothing to do with the climate. And then we keep moving on. Blizzard hits Sierra Nevada with feet of snow, as I mentioned just previously. Tens of thousands of people in California and Nevada without power. They don't mention climate change, though. How can that be? This is a unbelievable storm, and nowhere in this article does it say anything about climate change. I I'm at a loss. So Agnes here says you can't ski anymore, and then you say the downhill path for the ski industry. Meanwhile, you've got 10 feet of snow out in the Sierras, and I think the skiing's pretty good there, and will be. There's actually talking now that they're going to be skiing into July out there. So it's just pretty unbelievable. That's just a taste of the climate run we're having over these 2 weeks in the papers. And what I'd like to do now is talk about two things that are also in the paper that are kind of ironic. And the first one is America is running out of electricity. This is in the business section of the Suppress Herald. And here it is: America is running out of electricity. Projected new energy demand in North America doubles. Well, yeah, if you force everybody to drive electric cars, heat and cool their homes with electricity instead of gas, oil, and other options, and drive everything into electrification at a pace that's not market driven, but government mandate driven, then this is what you're going to get. And relying on wind and solar, which are intermittent, which means that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, are going to result in issues with reliable delivered electricity. And here they're trying to pass a mandate in Maine to have something like 84%, 85%, whatever it is, over 80% of all cars sold by dealerships in Maine are supposed to be electric cars by 20, 2030 or something ridiculous. It's just unbelievable that, you know, here we go, drive them, everybody, by mandates, by government, in effect, by the government running the economy, and they're going to run the economy into the ground. And now America is running out of electricity. That's a no brainer. And if we're not careful, we're going to see our standard of living and a lot of other things decline dramatically if we follow the path of places like Germany and other countries in Europe that have driven themselves off the electrification cliff and done it too fast without planning, without real educated approach. And they've created a catastrophe where electricity costs have just skyrocketed through the roof. People can't afford to pay their electric bills anymore. So even though you have a heat pump, you can no longer run it because you can't pay the electric bill to do so. And it's a real problem. And now here's the big one that is really interesting because they aren't going to tell you anything about what this really means or is. SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. Companies must disclose their greenhouse gas emissions. Under pressure from industry, the commission dropped a plan to require disclosure of supply chain and customer emissions. Now you just have to disclose your own in-house emissions for corporations. This is insane and is going to result in massive costs to corporations, which are going to be passed through, just like when you tax corporations, they don't pay taxes. These corporations are not going to pay these costs. But what we are going to do, and believe me, I have an intimate knowledge of this. This is the world I live in on a daily basis. We are going to create a massive bureaucracy of the people that have to go and count your greenhouse emissions, your greenhouse gas emissions, and you're going to have them come into your company and go through all of your operations and all of your materials, all your systems, and figure out what your greenhouse gas emissions are for your company. And that cost millions and billions of dollars is going to be passed through to consumers because the Securities and Exchange Commission wants you to provide this report. Now, why would this be happening? Why, what real purpose is there in having companies disclose what their greenhouse gas emissions are? The only reason you need to know those numbers is to punish them if they don't reduce them or have them at a level that the government deems reasonable. So look out. This is when you quantify your emissions, somebody's going to penalize you if you have too many. Now we get to the punchline. Like everything to do with the Green New Deal, with all of this climate change driven requirements, government mandates, all the rest. There's one end game here, and it's follow the money. It's very simple. It's called carbon offsets, carbon credits. The carbon offset market is and this is a quote from reading stories, it's right out in the plain sight, but you're not supposed to know what it's really about. Trillions of dollars. It's $1 trillion market for carbon offsets. In other words, once these companies are forced to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions, if their greenhouse gas emissions are too high, they're going to be forced to reduce them, which is going to be impossible because I just explained America's running out of electricity. So you're not going to be able to move to electricity because there's not going to be enough to go around. So your only option is buy carbon credits. You're going to have to pay somebody, and carbon credits are a lot like pet rocks. They are a joke. You're paying somebody to plant trees. You're paying somebody to build subsidizing a solar farm or a wind farm. But the people that are building the solar and wind farms are getting extremely wealthy. Our Senator Angus King right here in Maine got very, very, very wealthy with subsidies on wind farms. That's how he made millions of dollars. That's a long story. But the biggest one is the people that are the traders in carbon credits. So the Abenaki tribe here, I believe it was the Abenaki tribe or Passamaquoddy tribe here in Maine. I read a story. They sold carbon credits to the market for $30 million. What did they sell? They sold a promise that they wouldn't cut down all the trees in their forests on the reservation in Maine. Now here's the real kicker. They sold them for 30 million. How much were they bought by the end user in the end? How much did the middlemen, the brokers, make on buying those $30 million in credits from the tribe in Maine and then selling them to a corporation? I'd be willing to bet it's a significant percentage. They're cut. And if you're talking about a multi-trillion dollar market for carbon offsets, that's a multi-billion dollar skim for the moneymakers in the middle. And let me tell you, if you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in free money for doing virtually nothing but call it handling paper, here's your certificate for your $30 million for not cutting down those trees. And here's, you got to make a pledge that you won't cut down those trees. Here's your 30 million. And then you take the certificate and you go over here and you sell it for $40 million or more. That's good money if you can make it. And behind it is people like Wall Street and BlackRock and Goldman Sachs and the money men. And they're the ones paying for people to write these stupid articles about global warming. I almost guarantee it. So there you have it. And it must be they're making a play. Here's the big problem is that there is a rising movement of scientists, and I've spoken about this previously. There is a rising movement of very prominent, some of them, a couple of them are Nobel Prize winners. These are very prominent, very established, very competent scientists are speaking up and saying that the man-made global warming is not accurate. It's not right to be in the position we are, and it's not the existential threat that all of these, the media, driven by the money makers, the people behind this, and I sincerely believe it's the carbon traders are behind the whole thing to drive hundreds of billions of dollars in just free money into their pockets. And you and me and the people out there are going to pay through the nose for pet rocks. That's what's coming. So I think it's a big week because there's a rising, I have noticed in alternative media, the Epoch Times and other alternative sources of information. There are articles coming out that are very, very well written, detailed, with data, with statistics, with references, written by and about very prominent scientists that are coming out and basically pushing back against the whole man-made global warming initiative and the narrative. And so you're seeing, as I said, there are 12 climate letters and articles in the paper. What's interesting is what's not being written in the paper, and you will not see letters saying, wait a minute, I don't think climate change is quite what it's being portrayed. So moving on to some other things in the paper, we'll just kind of hit on a few things in general over the last couple of weeks and wrap up for the day. On Tuesday, March 5th, the headline was States Can't Bar Trump from Ballot. The Supreme Court rules only Congress can disqualify a candidate based on the Constitution's insurrection clause. As a result, Maine Secretary of State Shenna Bellows withdraws her finding that the former president is ineligible. I spoke about this in a previous podcast that Shenna Bellows, a unelected bureaucrat, liberal, Democrat, activist, Secretary of State in Maine, chose to take it upon herself to disqualify Trump for insurrection. And what I haven't seen since, here we are a week later, and not a single letter has been published by probably the hundreds that have been written to the Suppress Herald editorial board, stating that in one form or another, Shenna Bellows should resign, she'd be removed, she broke the Constitution. What she tried to do was beyond the pale and was beyond the scope of her office and beyond what she should have tried to do. And the fact that the Supreme Court completely rebuked her in no uncertain terms, 9-0. If you get the liberal justices decide against you when you're trying to pull something like this, you should resign. If you have all 9, you should be gone. But not a single letter has been published by this paper of probably the hundreds that have been sent. And I know at least one has been sent because I sent it. And my letter did not get published, and probably there were 100 that did not get published. So that's just a little point. The Suppress Herald is not going to allow people to express themselves in their rag. Some of the other things being published, here you got a woman from Auburn pleads guilty to 2 charges, face misdemeanors, including disorderly conduct. I have read that they're ramping up arrests. Haven't they got enough? If that many people go into the Capitol, they're up over like 1,200 people they've charged. Now they're going after people that were on the grounds that went beyond a certain fence, I hear. They're getting desperate. Biden's failing. Trump is surging. Everybody's understanding life was better under Trump. Life sucks under Biden. The world is exploding and burning under Biden. And they've got nothing left. And so they're sicking their minions on hapless patriots that went to the Capitol and felt strongly that the election wasn't right. And here we go. They're going to be putting them in the papers to basically keep the narrative going that January 6th was an insurrection. Then you've got, in the opinion page, This is just another specious article that they choose to put in. Washington Post. Okay, this is an opinion columnist from the Washington Post, owned by George Bezos, one of the billionaires, friends of the other billionaires that own this paper through the National Trust for Local News. Americans are happier about the economy. Why are they crediting Trump? And this goes through and basically lays out the case that this is ludicrous. That's a quote. Trump has claimed that economic and financial improvements thus far, including record high stock markets under Biden, are because of his influence or anticipation of his return. This is ludicrous. Here's the best part. This is the last paragraph of this article, which says absolutely everything about our media in this country. This should be a wake-up call for journalists who must do a better job of explaining the policy choices Americans face. It's also a warning for voters who must think through those choices more critically. In other words, don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe what you see. Don't believe what's actually happening in your own life. Listen to these journalists that are going to use propaganda to convince you that a shit sandwich tastes good. Darn it. That's where we're at. It's garbage, but it's our newspapers in this country. Just like this article. Tax cuts have cost US $2 trillion without delivering benefits. We should repeal the 2017 tax cut and instead invest in our children and families. A labor economist and independent policy consultant, labor economist. Yeah. It is unbelievable that this person writes this letter and then the newspaper, call it a newspaper, the Suppress Herald, publishes it. Basically saying that the tax cuts under Trump cost $2 trillion. Well, on its face, that may be the case. But the actual generation of income to the government in the form of tax collection skyrocketed after those tax cuts because the economy boomed. And as the economy booms, more people make more profits, more income, and income skyrocketed under Trump. Household income went up 10% in the 4 years under Trump. It's down 2% in the 3 years under Biden. So don't tell me that it cost, those tax cuts cost the federal government. That's not how it works. Revenue is derived from a thriving, growing economy. Increased revenue to the government is derived from rising tide, rising gross national product, rising corporate profits, which leads to corporate taxes, rising income on individuals that also leads to more income taxes. So the reality is those tax cuts produced very significant growth in revenue to the United States government, to the Treasury. And these articles are just nothing but garbage. And yet they're printed to try and cover up the mess that the Biden administration has made out of the finances of American households. With the average American household, a family of four, losing something in the neighborhood of $8,000 to $12,000 a year in real income due to inflation and a loss of household income. That's the reality, and that's the reality. People, every day they go to the grocery store, every day they pull out their credit card and borrow to pay their bills, know full well. And that's what's happening. And that's the recap. So that's what's happening with the Suppress Herald over the last couple weeks. Here we are on the 12th of March, and we have a lot of things going on. Looks like Biden and Trump both clinched the nomination for the presidential run. And I think that happened tonight. And you've got hearings going on with the media trying to cover up what Biden was up to with stealing hundreds of classified documents over a 40-year period and lying about it. So that's where we're at. And once again, politics is local and so is propaganda. And we'll keep telling you about it. I'm coming up. I'm going to have on the weekend next week, planning to do a full hour on global warming, climate change, and the farce and the fraud and where it all is headed. Thank you much. See you for the next one.